Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Cheryl Selman, and welcome to the Love Code. I'm so pleased you're with us today. This is a program that really has a great purpose, and the purpose is to uplift, inspire, transform, and heal you. How's that for a good goal and intention? So this is an opportunity to have conversations with wise, spiritually aligned, open-hearted people who have a mission in life, and the mission is to serve humanity and uplift humanity. So it's always my great pleasure to have these conversations with wonderful people, and I hope you will be joining me every week to inspire yourself, to keep yourself on the path and open to the immense possibilities that exist for all of us. I want to say before we jump into a fantastic conversation today that I have a website, and it's Dr. Cheryl Selman, and I will spell it for you. It's SHERRILLSELLMAN. And the reason why I would like you to go and visit my website and opt in there because I send all of the archive shows out to you. If you can't listen live, they'll come right to your inbox. And the other option is to go to my Facebook page, which is What Women Must Know. And What Women Must Know is the name of my other show on PRN. So if you go to either my website or like me on Facebook, you'll get both of my weekly programs. And, of course, you don't want to miss any of them because they are so inspiring, at least I think so. So, okay, I would like to take the opportunity to tell you about my guest today. We're going to be exploring a practical guide for realizing samadhi with Daniel Schmidt. And a little bit about Daniel. He has been practicing meditation and self-inquiry for over 20 years and has been teaching meditation for 10 years and draws on many different traditions in his teachings. Daniel is the creator of the award-winning film Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, as well as the ongoing Samadhi series. Most recently, he released a series of guided meditations and teachings as a practical guide to realizing samadhi. His approach combines self-inquiry with traditional forms of meditation so the participants have the opportunity to simultaneously realize their transcendent nature and to purify themselves of conditioned patterns. The pathless path is to realize an ever-deepening development process with the self-structure, within the self-structure, and to simultaneously realize what is always already beyond the self-structure. Samadhi is when the world that is constantly changing merges or unites with the changeless. Wow. So, first of all, I want to welcome Daniel Schmidt to the show today. Hello, Daniel.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're so welcome, and I'm so happy you're here. I just want to tell everyone listening why I have you on the show, and that's because I was browsing through Amazon Prime, looking for a good movie to watch or something inspiring, and there was Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds right there on my top line. And I didn't know what it was. It looked really interesting, and I just decided to play it. Well, I was just mesmerized. There are 4 episodes. I just went through all 4 in one night, and it was like, putting me into samadhi. Daniel, you did your job. And then I found your samadhi series, which I said, gosh, this is so interesting. It kind of just on the same line, same kind of focus and theme as Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds. And then, of course, I saw when I got to the end that you created it. So I've been so drawn to what you're doing. And I really hope all of my listeners will find Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds. Either it's on YouTube as well as Amazon Prime. It's the most phenomenal creation, Daniel, and that's why I had to find you. I tracked you down to find out who was this incredible man that made this profound I mean, it's profound. It's like it was channeled. The information is so amazing. And I found you. So I'm so happy that you are here and we're having this conversation today. So I just want to thank you for all the hard work you did to make that happen.
Thank you. Thanks for reaching out and branching out your energy to find me.
I can get very determined when I want to. Let's start by having you share your journey. Well, I'm sure I don't know much about your background, so I'm fascinated to learn your story. I'm sure it's a very interesting story that got you to this place and also created a center called the Samadhi Center in, I guess it's Western Ontario. Is it like in the countryside of Ontario, Canada?
It is. It's sort of in the middle of nowhere. I don't know if listeners know Canada very well, but there's sort of a big space on the map kind of between Toronto and Ottawa, which are the two main cities, so we're kind of in there somewhere. And it's a beautiful pine forest setting here. So I've been here for about 11 years now, and running meditation retreats. And it's been a long journey. I was just a very, I had a very normal kind of upbringing, kind of middle class family. My parents were teachers, and I just was very much just a person in the matrix, so to speak. Just pursuing money. Not, I was working in the television industry, which is a bit of a soul-sucking industry, but I didn't really have any kind of a spiritual path or calling at in my earlier part of my life, and it really wasn't until I experienced the suffering or the pointlessness of pursuing all these things that we typically pursue outside of ourselves. And so I had it's a long story, but I basically, something inside me didn't want to be doing what I was doing, and you could say my spirit or my soul really didn't want to be living the way I was in the city. So I had a health crisis. I didn't listen to the warning signs that it was giving me, and they were not so subtle warning signs. But sometimes if you don't listen to what's going on in your inner world, then sometimes your higher self will give you the hammer. So I required the hammer to really wake up out of what I was doing, and I ended up moving out into just a little. I basically got a little trailer house. My mortgage was like $200 a month, and I just moved out. I just got out of the system, and that was my way of just healing and going into my inner world. And I didn't have to worry about money too much because I was just, I stripped everything down to its bare minimum, and that was for me sort of the beginning of a different life and a different direction.
So you kind of left society behind, and I guess you were forced to because of your health challenges and being unhappy in the industry you were working in. What happened when you took that time and went into yourself and I guess into more silence?
Yeah, so the first thing was, I was, I'd moved out of the city, left my business partner, left my other partner that I lived with. So I was just out in the middle of nowhere by myself. And the first thing I realized, I bought a canoe. I had this whole kind of idealistic vision of how I would heal and kind of connect with nature and everything. And so the first thing I realized when I finally got my canoe onto the water was that my mind was completely insane still. I brought all my stress, all my conditioned patterns out to this new place. So nature is a phenomenal mirror to reflect back the truth about yourself. So the first thing I realized was that I'm like it wasn't actually my environment that was the problem. It was me. It was my own conditioning in my mind that was the problem. So the first realization was that I have to really take a good look at what's going on in my own mind and start to go deep into whatever it is that I am. Really look at what is it that I am, that this self, this Dan structure that I've inherited patterns from my family, from my teachers, and so what is that thing? Why is it so unhappy? Why is it stressed out? And at this level of agitation. So my probably the thing that really turned my life around at that point was I had a friend who was into Vipassana meditation. He would do the SN Goenka 10-day retreats, and he had just come back from one, and he was glowing, like he was very alive, and he was telling me all about it, and I thought, okay, maybe this is something. I was kind of desperate. I didn't really know anything at that point about the mind, about meditation. I hadn't even read a book about it, and but I saw this change in my friend, so I decided to go to do a 10-day retreat without even knowing really what it was. I just desperately wanted the off button for my mind, because at this point I had insomnia. I wasn't at peace at all. So that was probably the biggest thing. And the 10-day retreat, I went there, and they teach this ancient Vipassana meditation technique, and it was like suddenly it was like I was home. It was like I recognized it immediately as what I needed at that point in my life. So I had my first 10-day retreat. I had an awakening experience, and I don't know if I should go into that at all, but it
oh yes, please do. I think we need to. That's so powerful to hear what happens when you lift the veil.
Yeah. So yeah, like at that point in my life, like I was a real left brain person. Like my up to that point in my life, my path had been to go into philosophy in university, and then I went to law school. So I was like totally left brain. And so there was, having a mystical experience wasn't even on my radar at all, because I literally just wanted some relief from my mind. I just wanted the off button. I didn't care how it happened. So, but what happened at the retreat was, part of the technique. You're really, you're just coming into the present moment and allowing everything to be as it is, and I really took it seriously. I really, at that point, my feelings inside my body were intolerable. I was in a lot. I was going through. I had type 1 diabetes as part of my diagnosis, rheumatoid arthritis. So like my bones, in my deepest bones, like I was experiencing this incredible pain and ache. So when I was doing this practice, it was excruciating. It pushed me to 100% of what I could tolerate in the moment. But I just kept surrendering, and at a certain point, I think it was after quite a few days, I think maybe after 7 or 8 days of just being, single pointed in applying myself to meditation, what happened was, something gave way, and it was like the the energy and the pain and everything just sort of merged together with my consciousness, and it was like everything, all phenomena, all sensation, just sort of woke up as my consciousness. And in that experience, I now have a way of talking about it as I call it a samadhi samadhi experience. So it's a samadhi with a seed of form, basically. So there's still phenomena, and basically I merged with that phenomena, and it was unbelievable. It was like an ecstatic sort of experience where literally everything I was experiencing was me. So I experienced myself. I remember walking along the path at the center and seeing other people and feeling my own consciousness inside of them, and I felt the just energetically, like the chakras were open, so I felt it felt like the power of the universe moving through me, and yet it was consciousness. It was my own aliveness or my own awareness. So the thing about samadhi samadhi is that it's not the final samadhi where one recognizes their true nature. So I was at this point in my journey, I was completely identified with my self-structure. So, so the Dan character that was having this experience, I believed I was that. I believe I thought at that point I was enlightened, or I was like the Buddha or Jesus walking around in this state, and I was fully 100% identified with that. So you can imagine, like having had quite a bit of suffering up to that point, and then having this incredible experience, which at that point I believed, this is it. This is what I've always wanted. This is the state I want to be in forever. You can imagine the amount of identification with that. So of course, I wasn't. I wasn't at all prepared for this, and of course, it was just a state of samadhi. It wasn't a permanent stage of samadhi. So I lost it just as quickly as I got it, and the experience of losing it was, it was going from being all that is to being basically nothing, to being this little insect-like creature again, and so I felt the profound loss of that state as well, and literally wanted to kill myself at that point. Like it just I couldn't tolerate it, and it's because my self structure was just not prepared, and I didn't understand that in order to encompass these higher states, we need to be at a point in our journey where we can let them come and go, and without any attachment to them. So that was my first big lesson, and it wasn't until much later that I was able to really understand and have I had a true samadhi experience where I realized the emptiness of the self structure, basically, and I realized what samadhi actually is what doesn't come and go. It's actually our awareness that is ever present. So the awareness that was in that first experience, it wasn't aware of itself as all that is. It was still sort of asleep, and still the ego construct was really what was driving my life and driving the show at that point. So the real samadhi experience, the nirvikalpa samadhi, my first experience of that was about, I'd say, maybe 13 years later, when I was at a Zen center, and again, I was in a similar sort of situation, and I talk about conditions of no escape, where we put ourselves in these crazy sort of conditions of doing these practices, and the Zen center was even more extreme because you have to sit very rigidly still, and it was just a more intense period of practice. And at this time, I'd been doing a lot of self-inquiry, and they, part of their tradition, they teach the Heart Sutra as well. So a lot of the non-dual teachings were being taught at this retreat. And I was really, really struggling. Like, I was really experiencing, again, a lot of pain, and my meditation practice was pushing me to about 100% of what I could handle again. And I remember going to my teacher there, and he said, you can just drop the struggle, just recognize who is struggling. And then, of course, I was struggling to drop the struggle, and it just became this absurd. It got to a point where I had to either get out of there or somehow find out how to surrender. And I realized at a certain point I couldn't do anything. I couldn't make samadhi happen. The ego construct, or the Dan structure, or any technique, anything that I can do was futile, and I gave up. Basically, I completely gave up, but I stayed on the cushion, and I just surrendered. I basically, the self construct just realized that it had failed. There's nothing it could do. And it was in that failure, that surrender, that my awareness was still there. It had always been there, but it's like it woke up. I realized that I'm not that self structure. I'm not this activity of doing. And there was a profound sort of stillness, but it wasn't a stillness that you can make happen. It was just almost like the stillness recognizes itself, and it literally is like a waking up, and that stillness is, it's everything. It's the consciousness that permeates this entire world. It's been called many things in many different traditions, that Krishna consciousness, or Brahman, or Buddha nature, so that for me, that's what I refer to as nirvikalpa samadhi. So in that experience, there was a cessation of the Dan activity, the Dan structure, and so it literally stopped. Like there was a stillness and nothingness. There was no subjective phenomena in that experience. It wasn't even an experience because there's no experiencer. But yet there's this something that can't be said, which is awareness itself. In the ancient teachings, they talk about, the gross, subtle, and causal levels. So this would be the causal, the formless level of our being, which we experience every night. We don't experience it, but we go into it in deep sleep. So in deep sleep, there's no phenomena. So nirvikalpa samadhi is basically identical to deep sleep. There's nothing that can be described, except the difference is the awareness is present, or the I am. is present. So there's a sense of that the eternal awareness.
This is what all spiritual traditions talk about, as you mentioned. It does, in different ways, different languaging throughout time.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout time, this is the eternal truth that all spiritual traditions are pointing towards, which is what our real purpose here is to realize at some point in our many lives, right? At some point. How did that change you? And are you still in that place in your life now? Does it come and go? What's the experience for you?
So that's a good question. So, like I have to answer a question like that, kind of from the absolute and from the relative simultaneously. So I'll do both. So from the absolute perspective, what I am as absolute awareness, that doesn't change. There's nothing to change. There's no quality to it, and there's nothing that evolves or can be. There's no development process that happens with that pure awareness. So from that perspective, nothing changes. Absolutely nothing changes. You don't gain anything. You don't lose anything. But within the self structure, I use the term awakening and enlightenment differently. So the awakening is the awakening of that primordial awareness, which is eternal and changeless. But enlightenment to me is this development process that happens within the self structure that is an unfolding through time. So somehow, what we are as a human being, we're this eternal awareness, but it's embedded, or it's like in the Upanishads, they talk about the sheaths of the soul, or the sheaths of the self structure, and so there are many levels, many layers of mind that sort of in spiral or in case, it's like the awareness gets caught in the illusion of self, and so the self structure and the soul are they're changing and developing through time, and so that for me, there's a lot that kicks into gear when you have an awakening experience. From my perspective, what's happening is the enlightenment process or development process becomes accelerated. So we, there's sort of two aspects to that. We go into the existing self structure and kind of purify it of our conditioned patterns. So we go into our the conditioning that we've inherited from society and our biological conditioning, and we learn to not be continuously reacting to those preferences, which are they're just like little programs of craving and aversion that it's just the response to stimulus that we've inherited, and that response to stimulus is sublimated to all different levels of our life. So we're going after money, we're going after relationships, we're going after things that will boost our self-esteem. All that stuff is tied into that conditioning, and on the deepest root level, it's just pure response to stimulus. It's just wanting what gives us pleasure on the deepest sensory level and avoiding pain at that same level. So that purification process, is something that is really important. Once we've had an awakening experience, almost everybody who awakens they get drawn back into their conditioned patterns, and that was the case for me as well. After about 2 weeks, I had about a nice 2-week run where I was resting in awareness, but then bit by bit my conditioned patterns came back. So this purification process, purifying the sankharas that they talk about in the Buddhist condition, which are these patterns, is totally necessary if you want to have a purified vessel like your human body, to house that awakened consciousness in a more permanent way. So that is an ongoing process. And then as we free our energy from those conditioned patterns, that energy becomes free to explore other aspects of the self structure, like you could say the higher self, which in these ancient teachings they speak about that as well. So as human beings, like we're mostly existing in our society on the mental and physical level, but we also have in the Upanishads they talk about the energetic level, the pranic level, and then there's the higher mind or insight level, which is you could call it the archetypal realm or a higher intellect level. It's almost like the template level for our lives, and then beyond that there's the causal level, and which I described a little bit, which is it's the realization of in the yogic traditions when they talk about Sat Chitananda, which is the bliss of the truth, or the bliss of emptiness. That is the sort of the formless or causeless level of our self. So as we become free of these old conditioned patterns, this energy, it's the energy if you think about lightning or any energy is just like branching patterns. So it's you think about a human brain, it's just made of these branching patterns, and these higher levels of mind are just levels of energy that are branching and exploring, just like higher levels of mind. And so to me that is another big part of the development process, that so we're simultaneously becoming free of conditioning, and we're simultaneously creating new conditioning and subtler conditioning to experience all these aspects of human existence that we may not even have known existed. A lot of this stuff before I was meditating, I had no idea what was even possible, and now I know that I don't know. I know there's so much in the unfolding of this development process. Like I've been blown away many times. I've had different teachers, and they've connected me with things that were not even on my radar at all, and aspects of myself and aspects of existence that are just totally new. So I feel that the best sort of orientation or attitude to have to the path is one of beginner's mind, and really accepting that the limited mind, the limited me, doesn't know. It can't know. It's actually the obstacle to knowing, or to not even to knowing, but to the plugging in to these higher levels of mind. It's like it has to surrender the limited self has to surrender its energy in order to allow it to plug into these higher levels of mind and self.
This has been such a tremendous and profound journey for you, Jan. What do you how do you think you're different, I mean, in the way that you live your life now as from before you had these experiences?
Yeah, in some ways, like nothing changes. Like that's the interesting thing. Like a lot of teachers will talk about how, like before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So you still do all the same things, but all of the things that are happening within the self structure are still happening. But a lot of my life is, like if I look what's happening on a day-to-day level, I'm doing a lot of things that are, like doing meditation retreats and doing writing, working on films. Like a lot of it is just sort of, I think the way I would describe it is like if I look at myself 20 years ago, there were little seeds of things that I felt, my soul wanted to be doing, and yet I would never do them. Like playing piano, I would never be doing the things that I love that actually nourished my spirit, and it's because my self structure was too busy, doing all the stuff that it wanted to do, and watching movies or worrying about this or that, or just the patterns that we fall into. So I would say now, like the biggest shift for me is I'm not fighting myself nearly as much. Like I'm my default is to do meditation rather than to try and avoid meditation. And my default is more to just do, just allow myself to do the things that I'm meant to be doing. And I think the only measure on the path really is when you look back at your life. Are you actually suffering less in your life than you were, previously? And so when I look at when I started meditation, and and now, like the amount of suffering that I have in my life is less, and I think hopefully I generate less suffering for people around me as well, because I was a pretty, I had a very strong ego, and I still do. I still, my partner Tanya tells me that my ego construct is like, it really is a blessing and a curse. The mind is able to work with all these different things and talk about different aspects of spirituality and make all these connections, but it's also always simultaneously creating a facsimile of the truth of it's basically creating an awakened self-structure all the time. So one has to be very vigilant that you don't create some sort of spiritual persona and create the prison all over again. And I've done that at many points, and so I believe you're never beyond anything on this path. You're never beyond anything.
When you talked about purifying the patterns, many of the teachers talk about the need for purification when you're on a path of connecting to your real self. What do you suggest and offer people as strategies to help purify? And what is it that we're purifying? So we can define what that which is being purified is.
Yeah, well, it's very strange because it's you. Like, you're really purifying yourself of yourself. You know, it's a very strange thing that we're doing in meditation. So, you know, and even at a certain point, you know, all these techniques that we have in meditation, at a certain point, even the technique itself is, you know, every technique is conditioned, right? Because it's something that we learn and we have it. We have it in our mind and within our self structure. So even the technique itself, at a certain point, has to be dropped. So, you know, like, to answer your question, like the purifying, to me, like what's happening in meditation, you know, at the samadhi center, like we usually start out with techniques at a retreat. So we'll use a technique like observing the natural breath. And what happens is, you know, in Buddhism they talk about jhana, the jhanas, or states of meditative absorption. So, you know, the technique almost is irrelevant at a certain point. Like, we always start out with a technique that is, you know, like, that makes sense, basically, like you're dealing with something that is actually real in the present moment. So the breath is a great example. But you could be observing the inner energy of the chakras, or you could be, you know, there's a million techniques out there. You could be doing the Vipassana body scan technique, or you could be, there are different techniques where you note, you know, mental phenomena. You label mental phenomena. So it doesn't matter which one of these techniques. One of our teachers is really into, you know, all different techniques for different situations. And but the stripping away happens when you take one technique and you really go deep with it. So if you start to observe the natural breath, you start to come face to face with, you know, the hindrances. You know, so the hindrances are, you know, the mind will start generating thoughts, and so you have to start to make an effort to be in the present moment, or other hindrances will come, like tiredness or agitation and these different things. And so when we really, you know, we make an effort to just be with the meditation object, we start to pull energy out of these patterns, and these patterns, they call them sankharas, which are you know, just habit patterns of the mind, and these sankharas will start to come up to the surface as we're meditating, and it's just resistance. That's all it is. It's just, you know, the wiring that is inside of a human being needs to be running. It needs to be active in order for the self structure to exist. So when we're just sitting with our meditation object, we're just sitting with the breath, you know, we're not flowing energy into the old conditioned pattern, and it starts to get agitated. It starts to feel like, you know, literally, like if you sit, you know, for 2 hours or 3 hours without moving, your self structure starts to feel like it's dying. And so these sankharas that will come up will try and move you out of your meditation. They'll try and move you off the cushion, and you know, it generates aversion in your within deep part of your being. So it'll try and interrupt your meditation, and the meditation, staying with the meditation object, really, if it's the breath, like you're not really actually doing anything in the meditation. You're not. There's no actual activity happening. What you're really doing is just being with what is in the moment. And then, these sankharas start to come up, and you're really just recognizing the craziness that's already happening within the mind. And you just let it all come up to the surface. You let it arise and pass away. Whatever phenomena is there, it's authentically there in the moment. You just let it all arise and pass away. And as we do that, there are many levels of absorption. These jhanas that are talked about in Buddhism, and jhana just means like it's the same word as Zen in Zen Buddhism, actually, or in the yogic tradition, it's dhyana, and every level of jhana or a level of absorption that happens in meditation, there's a simultaneous sort of dropping away of activity of the mind, and there's you could say like an energy gets released as well. So there's a subjective experience of greater presence or concentration and less mind activity at every level. And so the first, to get through to the first jhana, we move through these typical hindrances that arise in meditation, and we have to be very persistent, and we don't make it happen. It just sort of happens as we just let go of our activity. We let go of any self or any doing that is happening in the meditation.
So I would imagine what you are describing from your experience in your studies is the process that is being recognized when all these studies are being done, the functional brain scans are being done, and seeing how the brain is altered, how people have less anxiety, improves sleep. When we're less agitated, when we're more at peace, when we're literally rewiring our brain through these practices of just being and observing, we actually are then experiencing the manifestations of a greater balance, more life energy flowing through us, just the ability to be more present and ultimately happy.
Yes. Yeah, our happiness that comes through, through meditation is not contingent on anything. It's just when the energy that is inside of us is just flowing freely, it's not engaged in a pattern, because these self patterns they're always trying to get something. They're always trying to get more, and it's always projected outside of ourselves. So that self structure, it is nothing but a series of preferences, wanting one thing or another, and these behaviors of trying to get them. So when all of that stops, when that whole system of trying to get more stops, and that energy is just present and just free, you're just being in the moment, and that is happiness. That's bliss. That's the transcendent bliss that is spoken about in all these traditions, and it has no purpose. It has no object other than just to be what it is. And so there's nothing to attain. There's no there are no conditions for that that need to be fulfilled.
Yeah, you don't have to purchase something, or you don't have to find the right person, or you don't have to have the perfect meal to be happy. Yeah. It's just your nature.
Yeah, it's just it's exactly true. It's our true nature is just that happiness. And when you see like a little kid, who's really, really happy, they're not, sometimes like, the simplest things can just be joyful. And so it's not it's not anything very profound in that sense, but it is profound because it's, when we can let go of this egoic agenda, then we receive everything, and it's always already there. But it's like we just have to stop. We have to stop grasping and experience this moment differently. Just experience this moment in a way that is not being mediated by this self-structure.
I have so many questions, and some of them will take us really deep, and I don't think we really have enough time. So I think maybe I'll just switch the conversation to the documentary you made. So the inner worlds, outer worlds, and as I said earlier in the introduction, I just highly recommend people watch this 4-part documentary and just take it in, just absorb it. There's so much information there. The mind can't totally comprehend what is being shared, but I think you get it on other levels, and it's just so beautifully done. So do you want to just talk a little bit? We don't have a lot of time left, Dan, so maybe just a little bit about how this came about to create this very, it's not just profound, but the amount of work that went into bringing all these pieces of wisdom from all these traditions together in a coherent way was amazing to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the whole filmmaking process for me is very mysterious. Like I started out in the television industry and making sort of cookie cutter TV shows, and what's happened now is it's the exact opposite of that. It is very mysterious how it works, and I with these films I just start working, and with that film in particular, like I had hours and hours and hours of stuff that I created, and I threw out probably 5 films during the creation of it, and it's just purely exploration and being willing to explore something and then let it go. And the whole thing really started as a PowerPoint that I was creating for a little meditation class that I was doing, and then it just kept growing. There was an energy around it, and people were responding to it, and it just kept growing. And to me, it is very mysterious. Like when I started this process, I felt like I'd had some insights in my practice, and I wanted to share them. But then as I started, really exploring and researching and connecting with all these different traditions, it just got more and more mysterious. And I realized, it was like this ever deepening rabbit hole that I was going down, and it just seems now like the more I do these films, the more there is to make a film about, and it's not, I don't feel like there will be ever any end to it, but for me personally on my own journey, like to be in the flow of that, to allow that to come through is, there's no place I would rather be. It's like being in the cathedral. It's like being in, the place where I can work with sound and light, and it, it is truly an exploration for me. I don't sit down with this stuff and have any sense that I have something to teach or something that I want to convey. I feel like I'm connecting to what these great teachers have all connected to, and there are countless beings who have embodied these teachings much better than I have or ever will, and it's all coming from this same source. But in terms of my own path, it is what connects my inner world with the outer world. Literally, the film is a bridge for me to bridge those two worlds.
Well, I cannot recommend it highly enough, and it's wonderful that it's found its way onto Amazon Prime and to YouTube. I mean, you can just go into YouTube and do a search for Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, and you'll find all the 4 parts of that amazing documentary you made. So I'm encouraging everybody to check it out. I think everyone will be profoundly transformed, if not healed, by watching what you've created. So I'm so grateful to you for doing that. And before we kind of come to the end, we only have a couple more minutes, but can you just share a little bit about the Samadhi Center? People want to know more about it and what you do there.
Sure. So the Samadhi Center is really a place to do meditation and self-inquiry. And I see meditation and self-inquiry as really one thing, part of one continuum, basically. So the way I teach it at the center is, usually starting out with techniques that will take you into less and less doing, like taking you to your stillness, to the point where you hopefully will have an opportunity for awareness to awaken to itself. And so it's just a container. I'm basically doing what the Vipassana centers are doing, the Zen centers, or the yoga ashrams. It's all sort of the same kind of techniques, but I just have a very eclectic approach, and I don't really subscribe to any one particular tradition. And so people can come for a weekend retreat for 10 days. A 10-day retreat is a great way to really, if you really want to get inside your conditioning and really get grounded in a meditation practice, it can be a great way to do it.
So let me just spell Samadhi for people who may not know how it's spelled. It's samadhi.ca for Canada, because Stan
that's right.
lives in Canada. So it's samadhi.ca, the website. And if you want to learn more, and just have a look, it's a beautiful center. Did you create that? Did you design that?
It's sort of, yeah. It was built about 3 years ago. So yeah, and it was sort of designed specifically for meditation. And we do a lot of sound stuff there as well, like meditation with sound. If you go to the site, you'll see images of large gongs and things there. So a lot of these sound tools are fantastic for connecting people with their inner world and their inner energy, especially if they've never really felt it before. So.
Well, you've created some amazing things, and that creative energy just keeps flowing through you. So I'm excited to see what comes next. And I just want to thank you for the wonderful work you've been doing and for your time today and helping to keep us all inspired and connected to our inner world. So thank you, Dan Schmidt.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It's been a great conversation, and to everyone listening, thank you. This wonderful conversation has been with Daniel Schmidt, who has created a beautiful documentary, Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, for free on YouTube or Amazon Prime. It's probably in other places, but those are the two easily accessed. And Daniel, just thank you so much for everything you've been doing. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining me today. And until we meet again next week, may your week be filled with love, peace, and happiness. Bye for now.